detector. It was about 3 foot long and looked like a big, long lawn dart. You ever seen a lawn dart? Well, it would implant itself in the ground, because the ground was relatively soft, and it would implant itself all the way down to about where the antenna would be, and it would be a weed sticking out of the ground. So it wasn't really recognizable as anything other than a piece of foliage, a piece of a tree or whatever. But this sensor was so sensitive that it would pick up foot traffic, truck traffic, and just about everything else. We also dropped something called the aqua buoy, which was a camouflage parachute dropped from about 500 feet at about 180 knots. And it would drop a microphone down to listen to all the voices. You could actually hear the gooks down there talking, and you could hear the sound of the trucks as they went by. You could hear the guys marching. You could hear just about anything. Very, very sensitive microphone. Again, all that data was sent up to the EC-21, 121, and over to NKP for analysis. And by the way, when we dropped the ADSIDs, we generally flew around 5,000 feet. The reason is that ADSID had to have time to go vertical. If you just fired it out at 1,000 foot, it would still be coming in at an angle. So we had to fly it from 5,000, drop it, and let it go vertical so that it would plant itself. Whereas the parachute type sensors, we had to drop those from only 500 feet. And we had to slow our airplanes down because otherwise it would rip the parachute apart going out there too fast. And we did not want the parachute type sensors to drift too far either. So we wanted to drop them pretty much right over the target. All right, first things first. Early December. We got checked in, we got comfortable, and it was time for us to go to a briefing. The first thing we found out we were going to do was fly with the forward air controllers. These were Air Force pilots that were flying the push-pull Cessna. You ever seen the O2, the push-pull Cessna? Engine in the back, engine in the front. These guys were short of crazy. The objective was, the first objective that we learned about was to teach us, pilots, co-pilots, bombardiers, and navigators, the lay of the land. In other words, you got your map on your lap, and you're pointing out that karst, that crook in the road, that arrangement of rocks over there, that bunch of trees, whatever landmark was unique that you could memorize, you had to memorize it. Then you had to correlate it to the map in front of you and mark it and say, okay, I know where that point is. And I'll be able to recognize that when I'm flying and when I'm navigating. Because I'm basically navigating from the nose of the P2. But I'm in the O1, I'm in the O2 Bird Dog at this point, and I'm flying with the fact platform. So again, the first objective was for me to learn, and for all the pilots to learn the lay of the land. And next thing I hear was, we're taking gunfire. And I'm looking at the map. So we're taking gunfire. And you know what the pilot did? He did one of these. Pulled out at 16 Gs. Not quite. Not quite. Almost ripped the wings off of that sensor.
Yeah.
He fired 2 Willie P's right at the spot where the gunshots were coming from and marked it as a gun emplacement. And he told me, okay, mark that on your chart. I marked it on my chart and I immediately radioed back to NKP. And I said, there's a gun emplacement right here at this coordinate. So they took that in as intel. Of course, that became real-time intel that was available to the very next guy who was out there in that area, knew to stay away from there because there were guns. All right. So that became our secondary objective, was to spot and mark the gun emplacements in a country that which we were not at war with. Somebody said that earlier this afternoon during lunch. Said, "Hey, we weren't at war with last." I said, "That's right, we weren't, but we were there anyway." Yeah. Okay. A typical mission started with a pre-flight briefing by the Air Force, and we learned about the latest gun emplacements and the most active trail segments and the weather and all those kinds of things. And we didn't really have any good navigation aids, so we were told, okay, I want you to fly outbound on your radio. So in other words, we might fly east on the 010 or 100 radial.
TACAN.
What?
TACAN radio.
TACAN radios, yeah. Or yeah, any kind of a radio beacon radio. So we flew out that radio to a landmark that we had known or marked as a recognizable landmark. So then at that point, we would turn toward what was called our initial point. And our initial point was something that would lead us straight into the target where we were going to drop our ordnance, straight in. And we had to intercept this initial point early enough so that when we hit the point, we were right smack dab on heading, right on altitude, and we generally were timing our drop. So when we hit that initial point, we would drop our ordnance, let's say, in 2 minutes, depending on how fast we were going, depending on where we were told to drop the ordnance. Now, sometimes we could see the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and most of the time, all we saw was green canopy. So we really didn't know where we were unless we could actually see the trail. Now, the belly cameras were picking up everything from the time we started turning onto the IP. So these analysts were so good that they could take the camera footage and they could take whatever information they got from the sensors that got activated immediately and started transmitting data, and they could put it all together and they could come up with a degree of confidence about how well we